Hello and welcome to this first edition of PressWatch 2012. I'm Wendy Brunner. PressWatch is a production of Oklahoma City University, made possible by the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. Over the next few weeks and months, we'll be taking a look at ethics, maybe excellence, specifically the national news media. We're turning a critical eye toward coverage of the presidential election. How is the media doing? What is the media doing? Where are they going? What are they covering? To do that, we'll be joined by expert guests, political scientists, community leaders, journalists, and we'll compare news coverage to the ethical guidelines that have been established by journalists and broadcasters themselves. But first, we want to begin by talking about why we cover politics in the news at all. So joining us now, our very first guest, OCU, Oklahoma City University's President Robert Henry, and also former Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. President Henry, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to join you.
We appreciate it. All right, so before we start talking about analyzing news media coverage, I think it's important for us to talk about the news media's role in the political process in general. And I wanted to ask you, as a man who spent your entire career basically studying the law, if you would talk to us about why the press plays such a critical role in the political process. Talk about, political watchdogs and the idea of the fourth estate.
Well, it is interesting. We have famously three branches of government in the United States, but we have the fourth estate. The press is an integral part of our system of government. It is, in fact, an integral part of all English and British contributions to government. There was always this idea of the watchdog, of the guardian. It is implicit in the separation of powers and the balance of powers that we have the press, that we have journalism. Jefferson, our third president, one of our key framers, I love this quote: "The basis of our government being the opinion of the people, the very first object should be to keep that opinion right. And were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate for a moment to prefer the latter." So here's the guy who founded our government. He said, if you give me a choice of government with newspapers or newspapers and no government, I'm going to take the newspapers, because it's important to have an ethical, reliable source to reform and modify and inform the people's opinion.
Right, so they understand how they're getting involved. They need that ethical, responsible, and unbiased, ideally, information from journalists.
Precisely.
And I'd like to talk to you about participating in the process, specifically that young 18 to 24-year-old age range. What I'd like for us to do is we have a video clip that was put together by two of our student reporters here at OCU in our broadcast program, Stephen Leahy and Rachel Morse. And what they did is they talked to some of our students here at OCU about what our students think politics is, what they think politics means, what they're interested in, what they think the issues are in this campaign. So I'd like for us to go ahead and take a look at that clip now.
Sure.
Well, immediately I think of my grandfather watching Fox News.
The first thing that comes to my mind is necessary evil.
Political elections every 4 years.
A bunch of people dressed up.
I think of leadership.
Honestly, I think of kind of middle-aged white guys.
I care about politics in the sense that it affects our environment.
We live in a democratic republic, so if you don't involve yourself in politics, you don't get your views represented.
It makes sense because that's what people want. We want stuff.
A lot of us are receiving financial aid. A lot of us are having to pay back student loans. A lot of us are having to pay interest on those loans, and all of these things affect us.
Because the decisions that political leaders make, have real effects on our lives.
Our biggest issues are public education and allocation of funds.
Be more progressive in innovation, get kids excited about education.
Education and healthcare is necessary to be an effective self-governed nation. It's just pragmatism.
However, I don't care for politics because of the corruption that often takes place in the system.
Unfortunately, some lobbyists have bad agendas and some of them have good agendas.
I think it's the system that we've determined is the best way to do that. it has been flawed at times, but I definitely think that we've chosen that system for a reason.
What I want from the government is to, just to treat people humanely and to treat each other with no prejudice through religion or personal preferences.
I just think that equality is the #1 issue right now.
I have 2 special needs brothers, and we're a middle-class family, so we don't really qualify for anything, but we still need help, but we can't get it, so.
We're not just students, we're people too.
Good politics can make for a much better life or a much worse life.
Even though I don't get into the whole politics thing, I guess you still need a voice.
By protecting a minority or protecting people who are falling behind, you're protecting yourself.
I feel like if people were to focus more on what the end product of the whole political process is, then we'd have a better government in general.
At least casting some kind of vote is better than not participating at all.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah, most definitely. 100% vote.
She was absolutely right. Vote. Get involved in the process. And you and I have had a conversation before about why young people, especially in that kind of 18 to 24-year-old age range, why maybe they're not taxpayers yet, but why they should be involved in the process, because we talked about who gets what being a big part of this.
Well, I was very impressed with the views expressed on the video. They talked about Fox News. Some people see politics as watching that it's a necessary evil, and yet the next student talked about leadership in politics. One student said we have a democratic republic. We do. The formal name for our government is a federal republic, a republic where people elect their leaders representatively. And a federal republic, states are involved in that. Student loans came up.
Of course.
The student said all of these things affect us. A person talked about the allocation of funds. That education and health care are needed to have a republic. They're worried about corruption, equality, participation. I have 3 definitions of politics that I like to use. One is perhaps cynical, and the other 2 are more accurate. The cynical one was by the Oklahoma socialist Oscar Ameringer, who said politics is the art of taking votes from the poor and money from the rich on the pretext of protecting each from the other.
Oh, that is cynical.
Now that's the cynical view. But David Easton, a political scientist of some merit, said that politics is the authoritative allocation of values. Authoritative, somebody that has the authority, a representative, somebody who's elected or somebody who's king or queen by divine right or whatever, but someone with authority decides to allocate values. But a better working definition, I think, was the University of Chicago political scientist Harold Lasswell, who liked to say that politics is who gets what, when, and how.
That's great.
So politics is about stuff. If you have a desire for stuff, if you want some stuff, you have to play the political game or you will have no voice in the allocation of stuff.
Stuff, money, funding.
Student loans, favorable treatment for mortgages, tax breaks, salaries, education, health care. All of these things are stuff, and the political process allocates it. So you either play the game or somebody else decides what, if any, stuff you get.
And that is exactly the best reason. Vote, get involved in the process, because who gets what, that's what it all boils down to.
Right.
All right. President Henry, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. All right. Coming up next, we'll be taking a look at 2 controversial events in the national news media spotlight from the past year. We'll be talking about Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh next. Welcome back to our first edition of PressWatch 2012, where we'll be taking a look at the behavior of the national news media throughout the course of this presidential election. For months now, it's been all about the Republicans. Who gets the GOP nod? And there are two very interesting and controversial, I think, events that we're going to discuss. We'll talk about Rush Limbaugh and Sandra Fluck coming up just a few minutes. First, though, Newt Gingrich, his reaction to accusations of an open marriage. And to do that, I'd like to welcome Kate Houston, an assistant professor of political science here at Oklahoma City University. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it. All right, Newt Gingrich, let's go back to what happened in January of this year. I think that you would probably have to not watch television at all, not to have at least heard about this. So we have the video clip of when it's the CNN debate, GOP debate that we're talking about, that was moderated or hosted by John King. And he began the debate by asking Gingrich about his ex-wife's accusations. So we have that video clip. Let's go ahead and take a look at that first.
As you know, your ex-wife gave an interview to ABC News and another interview at the Washington Post, and this story has now gone viral on the internet. In it, she says that you came to her in 1999, at a time when you were having an affair. She says you asked her, sir, to enter into an open marriage. Would you like to take some time to respond to that?
No, but I will. I think the destructive, vicious, negative nature of much of the news media makes it harder to govern this country, harder to attract decent people to run for public office, and I am appalled that you would begin a presidential debate on a topic like that.
He was clearly not happy about that. All right, so because we're looking at ethical behavior of the media, I want to start by saying one of our organizations that sets up voluntary kind of guidelines, codes of ethics for broadcast journalists is the Radio Television Digital News Association. And they have a guideline that says specifically, electronic journalists should provide a full range of information to enable the public to make enlightened decisions. So this is what I want to ask you about. Asking that question and allowing an opportunity for Gingrich to respond in that kind of a fashion, do you think that his response, is that about publicity, the way you answer that kind of question? Is that about rallying support, rallying the troops? What do you think?
I think that Gingrich was doing a couple of things with that. Gingrich was responding both on a personal level, but he was also responding on a political level. So he was, and to some extent, rallying those troops that support him, trying to also squash an uncomfortable question to lead off a presidential debate. I mean, nobody would like to start a presidential debate like that in terms of as a candidate. But it really is a lot to do with trying to rally your supporters. He had framed himself pretty much as a values candidate. And when you do that, then you have to kind of expect questions about your values. And he was trying to turn the debate, I think, a little bit towards a more positive tone for him and to also get his supporters to be in the same mindset.
So you think that he was expecting that kind of a question? Like he was expecting that to come up, or?
I don't think.
It's hard to say.
I think he definitely knew it was coming. I'm not sure that he could have imagined a scenario where something like that had been in the media for so many days prior to that debate, and it had really come up in interviews before then as well. He knew it was coming.
And you mentioned that it had been in the media, and we have another video clip that I'd like for us to take a look at where John King, who asked that question, is actually defending his decision, why he went there, why he even mentioned that. And then we also have a couple of clips from more journalists and commentators, kind of a response on the issue, and also a little bit of criticism too. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
As you noted, Mr. Speaker, this story did not come from our network. As you also know, it is the subject of conversation on the campaign. I get your point. I take your point.
John, it was repeated by your network. You chose to start the debate with it. Don't try to blame somebody else. You and your staff chose to start this debate with it.
You make a decision, you ask the question, and this is politics. This is politics. He's trying to promote himself, promote an agenda. Of course he's going to attack us. I don't take that personally.
But I want to say one other thing. As a journalistic matter, John had a duty to ask that question, It was the elephant in the room. After all, his wife is accusing him of hypocrisy, being the man of family values, who had this private life that was in conflict with what he was preaching, and the man who went after Bill Clinton. On a similar set of issues, he would distinguish it because Clinton was a sitting president. But nonetheless, for a lot of voters, there is hypocrisy in that. So that was the elephant in the room. And John King is known by most of the people here as one of the fairest people in the country.
Let me say that reasonable people may disagree on this matter. But if you're asking if I would run it, the answer is no, I wouldn't have. And in case anybody's interested, it has nothing to do with whether I like or dislike Newt Gingrich, or it has nothing to do with politics at all. In fact, I could only think of one reason to run the interview, and that is it's a ratings bonanza.
So some difference of opinion, not big surprising that there's sniping going on between the networks. That's typical. But since we're talking about ethics again, I want to mention another code. And this one is actually from the Society for Professional Journalism, or journalists rather. And this is, again, voluntary codes. But they suggest that journalists should show good taste and avoid pandering to lurid curiosity. So my question to you is this: is his marital status, the open marriage thing, is that a legitimate issue, or are we pandering? Is that lurid curiosity?
I don't think it's pandering or lurid curiosity on the part of the media anymore. Gingrich had framed himself, again, as this values candidate, and he had really talked already about being, he had talked about the Democratic Party being the destroyer of traditional family marriage. Right. And when you pull marriage and politics into the same boat, and you're the one talking about it, your own marriage and your own personal life is going to come into question. Beyond that, there is a huge segment of the population that really does fundamentally care about electing a good, as well as you can define what good is, right, president, and someone who is going to have solid character. And that does matter, when we talk about various different policy solutions. You don't want someone who's necessarily going to be of questionable character. So I think it's not pandering and it's not your curiosity. I mean, if we were going out there and trying to dig things up intentionally, right, but Gingrich's life was out there for everyone to see, and he was framing it and talking about him himself, and I think that's an open question.
And as they mentioned before, he was one of the ones that was going after Bill Clinton back in 1998, so yes, they kind of opened that door already.
Yes, he did open it.
All right, valid question then. All right, Kate, we're going to actually ask you to stay with us for just a couple of minutes. We're going to come back in just a moment, because coming up next, he called a young woman the S word. You know what we're talking about, Rush Limbaugh, back in March. The firestorm he ignited. More next. Thanks for staying with us here on Press Watch. I'm Wendy Brunner. All right, so far today we've talked about politics in general, what that means. We've also looked at the Newt Gingrich controversy and the question during the GOP debate about an open marriage. So now we're going to return to Professor Houston, and we're going to talk about this Rush Limbaugh thing. Back in March, of course, he was asking he was commenting on a young university student who believed that birth control should be paid for, mandated to be paid for by health insurance. So again, we have a video clip. We have Limbaugh's original statement, what he said on his radio show in response to that. So let's take a look.
What does it say about the college co-ed Susan Fluke, who goes before a congressional committee and essentially says that she must be paid to have sex? What does that make her? It makes her a slut, right? Makes her a prostitute.
Those are some harsh words.
They are.
but he's not a politician. He's not a candidate. He's a political commentator. But I want to talk again about ethics and the way that the news media covered these comments. And I want to point out there's another code of ethics from the Society of Professional Journalists that says that journalists should examine their own cultural values and avoid imposing those values on other people. And so what I wanted to ask you about is, do you think that the media, maybe we responded to that outburst and those comments the way that we did? Maybe it bothers our own value system. Perhaps that's the case. And so, if we cover this sort of thing to the degree that we did when it happened, are we inadvertently maybe setting an agenda, do you think, for the issues in this election?
I think that, to answer your first part of your question, I think that whenever you have a situation in which a political commentator, is going after someone who was exercising her right as a citizen to make public comment. I mean, she was making that comment in a congressional hearing. She was doing her job, her duty as a citizen, and he has every right to comment on it, but the way he commented, it was questionable. And I think that any reasonable person is going to react to that in a way. So if we talk about, values, and are we implementing our values on top of on top of the situation, I think that we as a nation have a core set of values that we share that's not so different depending on whether you're Democrat or Republican. And to some extent, he offended those base values. And
regardless of party affiliation,
yes,
like you
regardless.
said, that's just offensive across the board, I think. And I think that that's probably what sparked so much of the outrage. And that makes it, from a journalist's point of view, that makes it a legitimately newsworthy story, regardless of the fact that it was offensive and kind of very controversial. I think that's safe to say. We have another video clip, and this is reaction from some of the national news media to airing the story, and there was a lot of reaction, a lot of criticism, also support for even discussing the issue, and also some criticism of certain networks for maybe not talking about it enough, although that's hard to say because we talked about it a lot. But let's take a look at some of that video.
Is there a danger of overkill in the media coverage? For example, earlier this morning, Newt Gingrich on Meet the Press said, well, why is the elite media not talking about gas prices or other issues that would make President Obama look bad? They suddenly decide the Rush Limbaugh is the great national crisis of the week.
All of these things are being covered. It's not an either-or proposition, and that's a false comparison. People are covering gas prices and jobs and the economy and everything else. This is a distraction. It's a horrible one, but the media has an obligation to highlight when these things are said in the public venue.
Come back to the fact that this has barely been on the radar screen at Fox News. And last year, when Ed Schultz used the slut word, the S word, Sean Hannity was all over him. There were certain words you never say about a woman to a woman ever, ever, ever. It was over the line. It was distasteful. And during this whole Rush thing, it came up slightly on Hannity's show, and he complained about the left not criticizing its own, but he didn't have a word to say against Limbaugh. And it almost was treated as a non-story at Fox.
Yeah, I know. Why, I'm glad you're calling them out on that. Republicans have done themselves a terrible disservice to women in the past few months, and Fox is now perpetuating that. If they want to be taken seriously as a credible news organization, and I would say that the reporters and Bret Baier and some of the other anchors at Fox are excellent, excellent journalists, but there's this whole other part of Fox News that contributes to this idea that they don't have credibility, and the news side has got to correct the other side, the commentary side.
I think it's not surprising at all to see, again, like we said before, the media sniping at each other a little bit. That's very typical. But again, one more ethical code. The Society for Professional Journalists says that journalists should be supporting the open exchange of views, even views they find repugnant. So this one probably repulsive to a lot of people, I think. But if it's about the open exchange of views, if it's about igniting a dialogue, one of the commentators mentioned, well, how come the news media hadn't been talking about gas prices or the economy or other healthcare issues, that sort of thing? And she mentioned, I think those things were being covered, but do you think that, is this about us not covering the right issues? There's that whole liberal media accusation thing. What do you think about the issues?
I think the issues are covered. I think sometimes they do tend to get lost. in the 24-hour news cycle, the need to talk about something. You can only talk about gas prices so long before people are going to start moving away to another channel. And so there is that element of being a business, and there is that element of competition, and needing to attract people who are going to watch your programming. That being said, journalists do have a responsibility to be able to talk about multiple issues. And the Rush issue was a legitimate issue to talk about. You have someone who has a lot of people who listen to him. He's the most highly rated political commentary show on the radio.
Huge audience.
Huge audience, and people listen to him, and people react to what he says. And they reflect then in their political dialogue with one another. They reflect then in their political dialogue with their elected representatives, those views. And so journalists do have a responsibility to cover those kinds of activities when something like that happens and when a political commentator steps out of line.
So regardless of the fact that, that women's health care maybe might not have been on the radar, this is something we settled many years ago, but we had to go back there again. We had to bring that back up again.
Well, I mean, reproductive issues are huge this election cycle. They're huge in Oklahoma right now. They're huge across the country in a number of states, women's reproductive issues. And so the issue really is on the table all the time. The question is how much we talk about it,
right,
versus how much we talk about those who are talking about it.
Exactly. All right, thank you so much. Oklahoma City University's Assistant Professor of Political Science, Kate Houston, we so much appreciate your being here. Thank you for your insight. All right, that is all the time we have for PressWatch 2012 today. We are so grateful to both of our distinguished guests. PressWatch is a production of Oklahoma City University in partnership with the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. We will be doing this again very soon, so make sure you join us next time.